Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Kenny Michael-Otton from Jolly Swagman Games. Kenny is an Aussie with a passion for games. His first crowdfunding campaign for his board game Scrap is currently on GameFound. Kenny, welcome to the binge. How you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little tired this morning in Australia, but otherwise doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this is awesome I think you might actually be the first Australian. Maybe I've had one other guest from Australia on the podcast, but man, this just goes to show you that this hobby spans the globe, right? And I know with a lot of our listeners, we have a lot of listeners in Australia as well. But it's cool to start getting guests from these different pockets around the world. We get a lot of people from Europe, a lot of people from North America, and it's good to kind of add to that list some Aussies. So welcome.
Thanks so much. It's funny how much I've heard that recently from so many people where they're like, this is the first Australian design game we've reviewed, or you're the first Australian designer we've talked to. There are some of us down here. But yeah.
I think part of that is maybe the cost, right? So when you look at, especially when you get into like Kickstarters or crowdfunding, and in your case, GameFound, the sheer cost to service Australia is significant, right? And unless you're going directly with, was it Aetherworks in Australia or another distributor? Most will actually handle that through either their US-based distributor, fulfillment partner, or through their UK fulfillment partner, like a Games Quest or ShipQuest, for instance, and then they will take care of the Australian fulfillment. But certainly, I think the community is quite large down there, and maybe we can start by talking about that. So, as a board gaming community in Australia, how big is it there, and how robust is it, and how involved are you in that community?
Yeah, so of course it depends, like anywhere in the world. It depends on exactly where you are in Australia. So I would say originally I was from Sydney, and in Sydney it's a pretty robust scene. So there's lots of different gaming groups around that you can visit on basically any given night of the week. Like tonight in Sydney, I know there's at least one in Parramatta, which is where I'm currently staying. And there's another one in the city, and there's others on the weekends, and there's a heavy board gaming thing. There's a lot going on, basically, is long and short of it for Sydney. But for the last 2 years, I've been living in Canberra. And I would say that Canberra is, for its population size, it feels like it's a fairly dense gaming populace. But there still doesn't seem to be that much happening there. There was the local game store that I would attend, on the weekends, and they'd have events sometimes. But other than that, during the night, I'd have to go and meet up with, my friends to go and play with them. As far as how involved I am in the industry, well, it's bits and pieces. So my folks are actually they work for different gaming companies as well. So they're involved in Yeah. So my stepdad actually he always says that he opened up the first gaming store in Sydney, which was Sydney Game Centre a long time ago.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, that was the first game store I ever went to as well. Other than that, what do I do? I mean, I just certainly design games and I go out and play them a lot. But I don't. I go out to game nights and that kind of thing. I don't host any of the game nights. I'm a happy participant rather than a host.
Is there a lot of gaming cafes, or is it mainly just like game shops around you in Australia?
Predominantly game shops. Yeah. There are a couple of game cafes that prop up here or there, but there's a couple that have been successful for a short time, but then over the long term, especially over the pandemic, it really was quite hard for a lot of them. But yeah, predominantly most of the gameplay happens in game shops, or alternatively, a lot of the time we host game days in like pubs and that kind of thing. Pubs and clubs often are very welcoming to board gaming groups and that kind of thing. The one in Parramatta I mentioned tonight is at local Parramatta club. Parramatta as well being quite a major city in Sydney. So it's not like a small club, in the middle of nowhere. We're talking like the second major CBD is just welcoming board gamers in and everything.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of like a day job, like is this your day job, or are you doing something else and this is kind of your side hustle, or
so I would say it was funny. a few weeks ago, I did finish up my day job for the time being. So my day job is a speech therapist,
Wow.
or a speech pathologist in Australia. But then because I finished up that job because I'm prepping to move overseas, I was basically between jobs, and so I met some new people, and they said, "What do you actually do for a living?" And I said, "Well, funnily enough, at this exact moment, I suppose I'm a game designer. That is my full-time job at the moment." Um, but I would say that generally it's more of a side gig. Look, I would love for it to be a full-time gig. I would love to design games all day, every day, and
Yeah.
create fun experiences for everyone. But we'll see how that goes over the longer term.
That's definitely the dream, I think. And you said you're moving
Yeah,
overseas. Where are you moving?
only across the pond. So I mean, I'm. What happened was I was in Sydney. I moved to Canberra. I moved back to Sydney for a month, and then I'm moving with my partner to New Zealand,
Oh, wow.
because
Okay.
she's originally from New Zealand. So as such, she's moving home basically, and I'm tagging along.
I always love when people say they're moving, like when they refer to something as across the pond. It's definitely relative to where you are, right? So where I
Yeah,
am, across the pond is Europe, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's what we refer to
yeah.
as across the pond. For you, across the pond is just New Zealand, which
Yep.
is
It's a little bit of a bigger pond, I think, between America and Europe and Australia and New Zealand.
oh, for
Um,
sure.
yeah.
And then your game design. So you've been doing. So how long have you been designing games for?
Designing games. So I would say that like I really started to more consciously consider game design probably around 2015.
Mm,
So yeah, that sounds about right. I actually probably 2012 was when I started to consume more game design related media.
yeah.
Um, so I suppose that was when, I started to get the ideas for it, but actually consciously trying to design games probably more around the 2014, 2015 era. Um, and then, yeah, I'll talk about Scrap a little bit more later
Yeah.
on. But that's obviously been within the past few years as well.
By having parents that are in this industry, I imagine you've been exposed uh, to board games your whole life. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say? Or
So yeah, I have. So I've actually, funnily enough, not my stepdad. My stepdad, as I mentioned, had already opened a game store.
yeah,
By the time I was playing games, and that was actually the first time that I met him was at the game store.
oh, that's cool.
Um, but before that, I would actually say that I was the influence. They got my mum into gaming, and then they got her into the kind of working in the gaming industry as well.
Uh,
So I've been gaming, as early as 5 years old, really, when I got my first Pokemon cards,
yeah,
when the very first set of Pokemon that came out, um, which probably gives my age away a little bit. But, I would say that for tabletop gaming, like proper board gaming, what you'd consider modern board gaming,
yeah.
since about 10 years old.
Wow.
So 19 years now. So quite a while.
Yeah.
Like I may seem quite young, but yeah, 19 years has been a while.
Yeah, like when you have that kind of exposure, and I guess the equivalence I would give would be I've got a buddy. He was actually one of the
Mm.
first guests on this podcast, and he owns I think over 1,000 games. Like he is just a walking
One of those people.
encyclopedia when it comes to board games. Like he's into the hobby deep, right? And he loves board
Yeah.
games. He loves socializing. He's the one who started our meetup that I go to every week.
Mm.
And but when you have that kind of exposure, you get access to pretty much all mechanics that are out there, right? Because you're playing different games, and it definitely gives you a different visibility and informs you, I think, a lot better in terms of your game design. So when I'm talking to him about games I'm working on, he'll look at it and he'll say, "Oh, that reminds me of," and he'll list off 5 games that I've never even heard of, right?
Yeah.
And so for him, I think that having that knowledge, if he ever did get into game design, which I keep encouraging him to do someday, I think he'd probably design a pretty good game, right? Because he would have that wealth of knowledge. Whereas I, on the other hand, and many others, we don't know what we don't know, right? So you don't, if there might be a game mechanic out there you've never even been exposed to before. So the more these things you get exposed to, I think the more robust your approach will become in creating your own game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something I intentionally try and do. So pretty much
Yeah.
whenever we go to a new game night, oh sorry, not a new game night, whenever we have a game night, often, everyone will have a shelf opportunity or a shelf of shame or a new thing that's come out in from crowdfunding. And I'll pretty much say yes to every single new game. Purely almost from a scientific standpoint, where I just want to see what the game's doing and see if it's interesting. I also used to do a lot of game reviewing, so I always am curious to see what else is out there and see how it kind of matches up against what already exists as well.
Yeah.
So even though I've got games I absolutely love and would play any day of the week, if given the choice, I'll usually play a new game, just again for that kind of academic pursuit of it. But when it comes to my own collection, I'm actually, even though I've been in the industry for 19 years, I keep a very lean collection. So I'd say my collection's probably about 50 games or so. That's not to say I haven't played thousands.
Mm-hmm.
I have. I've played everything across the spectrum from, code names to GMT war games about conflicts in the 1400s.
Sure.
But I just don't find myself keeping anything that really is below like an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10 for me.
Wow. Well, that's good for you to be able to keep a lean collection, because I know how
it's not easy.
It is difficult, right? Like
I say this, and 3 games just arrived in the post yesterday, and I'm moving overseas soon. So I'm not a saint of minimalism.
Yeah.
I succumb to purchasing as well, but I try and keep it down.
So when it comes to scrap, how did you come up with this idea for scrap? Where'd that come from?
So scrap came up. I came up with the idea of scrap quite some years ago, actually. The initial idea, at least, probably around that 2015 time, actually. So for a long time, I'm a fan of really interactive games. You kind of area control, as a lot of people call them, dudes on a map games. Like lots of soldiers, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Blood Rage, Rising Sun, those kind of games are very much my jam. And at the time, I wanted to kind of create my own series of games. I'm a really big fan of sci-fi stuff. So my ambition at the time was to create a series of area control games with different sci-fi themes. So for example, one was going to be a robot theme, one was going to be like a bestial alien theme, and so on and so forth. And the ultimate goal would be to have it so that all of them could be played together. Like, basically each one was almost an expand alone, where it would be its own game, absolutely. And you could never think about the other game and just play it. But the systems would be compatible enough that you could actually play them with each other. So that was where the initial idea came from, was, Scrap being that robot game, and having a bit of a programming system in order to drive it, very thematic for robots programming. It's not the most inventive idea in the world, but it's certainly within theme. And then what happened was in 2020, the COVID lockdowns hit most people across the world. I found myself at home a lot more with a lot more time on my hands. And so I started designing. And funnily enough, I actually started off designing that bestial alien game. So the other one in the series. But over time, as I was designing it, it hit this point where I wanted to introduce more concepts. So when you think of bestial aliens, I'm talking things like, imagine that you're playing alien tigers or like alien gorillas or that kind of thing.
Okay.
That kind of bestial. Yeah. So not intelligent civilizations or anything like that. Literally just alien animals, effectively. But I wanted more mechanics around building things, and I couldn't really think of stuff apart from nests or things for them to build. So I kind of initially just altered the theme to be robots so that they could build buildings like factories and so on and so forth and have it be fine. But then when I was encountering some of the design problems with that version of the game, which was a very, very early version, I thought back to 2015 around that robot game I wanted to make with programming. And how much I love robots and how you can do really interesting things with programming. And the main problems I was having with the design were actually going to be solved by that programming mechanism. So I made the shift, much to the chagrin of a lot of early playtesters who were like, I don't know about this, like it's going okay. And I went, I'm pretty sure this is the right choice, and I haven't looked back since. And I think it's been an amazing development since then.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I want to start off by just congratulating you on this campaign. This is in Australian dollars. I usually put things in Canadian dollars because on Kickstarter I can see it. We're on GameFound. We're going to talk about GameFound in a second here. But you're at 23,000 on a goal of 23. So you just crossed your goal, and you still have 26 days to go. So congrats on that.
Thanks so much.
That's amazing. For those in Canada, it's roughly equivalent dollars in Canada as Australian dollars.
We're about the same.
Yeah. So this is 2 to 4 players. Can you walk us through kind of the essence of how to play this game? I just want to say, like, the board looks super cool. Like, I love this kind of modular board you have together with the hexes that kind of connect it, and then the meeples are they stickered or are they printed? I can't tell from the photo.
So the thing I always say, because people always say, oh, Scrap's got screen printed meeple, and I'm like, up, they're not screen printed. So it's a process called heat stamping.
Okay, gotcha.
Basically, if you're familiar with like t-shirts and stuff, you get like some kind of print and you iron it on. That's effectively what's on the meeple. So they are stickers, but you don't apply them. They've already been applied in the manufacturing process. Basically, the film rolls on top of them. You apply heat and it transfers the image onto them. So you get that really high quality image, which is basically the same as what the artist did.
Yeah.
You don't compromise on color or anything, and that's what you end up with, basically. So heat stamped meeple.
I mean, and who did the photography for your page? I mean, it's really well done.
Yeah, thank you. So, funnily enough, that was actually just done by a local friend of mine. So the thing with my campaign, a big quick shout out to Lauren and James for helping out with the photography. They wanted nothing in return. They just wanted to help out with the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say photography is not like that's not what they do every day. As it turns out, James is also learning to be a speech pathologist, and Lauren is a practicing psychologist. So we're all allied health practitioners, but no one does photography apart from for a hobby. But I thought they came out brilliantly.
Oh, they did great, yeah.
Yeah, with the campaign, I guess what I emphasize is I've tried to really ensure it's authentic in that way, right? So, the video was shot at home. My mum was the cameraman with my Galaxy iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a camera set up. I edited it on my computer with some free software I got from somewhere. Like pretty much everything you see on the campaign was edited by me or, helped produced by someone within my friend group. It's not a big branching campaign with, thousands and thousands of dollars behind it. It's very much me.
It's lean. Good. And then the gifts, and who did all the gifts for you?
That was also me as well. So yeah, so the gifts, look, I'm not saying the gifts are the most excellent thing ever. I've actually got asked that question twice. But I made those in PowerPoint. Part of the journey of me getting to where I am today is also just the story of me building up all of these different tech skills. So learning video editing and learning how to animate and all of this stuff. So, as I said, like they're not the most technical gifts ever. Like obviously you can make them look much fancier than that, but I think they explain and get the job done.
So you said PowerPoint you did these in?
Microsoft PowerPoint.
Come on. Yeah. Really?
Seriously. Yeah. Microsoft PowerPoint. So even parts of the video that you saw, so not the GIFs, but the actual the game found video, the parts that are more animated where it's, talking about, in Scrap and it shows the art and stuff. Those were all videos that I made using PowerPoint, then recorded, then exported to the actual video editing software. So I originally, I got very familiar with PowerPoint. I did all of my card editing and everything in PowerPoint originally as well. I didn't have any other software.
Yeah.
So that's how kind of low budget originally
that is was. Crazy. So for people who are listening, this I find shocking because I would assume this is done in Blender or something like that. You should create a video, like a tutorial on that. I bet you your views on that video alone would be quite high. That is
how to do GIFs in PowerPoint.
Yeah, like how to create it's an animated video. Like you're showing like the cards moving around, and then arrows are going to, the symbology, and then you got squares going around symbology, and then it's like zooming in and things like that. Like it's very, very slick. Congratulations, man! That is awesome. Wow.
Thank you.
That's
as I said,
I always love it when I'm surprised at something when I'm talking to the guests. This one actually surprised me. That's cool.
Yeah. It's PowerPoint, surprisingly powerful piece of technology. I showed something before. I remember maybe a year and a half ago, because that was the first time I tried my hand at making a GIF with PowerPoint. It wasn't as, I would say, the ones now are a little slicker.
Yeah.
But even at that time, I remember someone saying, what technology did you use to make the GIFs? And I was like, I just used PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, PowerPoint? I'm like, yeah. It's just everything I was doing at the time was in PowerPoint. As I said, all of the cards, the templates, everything. I used to have slides. So I used to have like 150 slide PowerPoints with each page having a different card, just so I could have them all in the same spot and everything, and go through and edit them. And it was crazy.
That's
a very
amazing.
Different time.
You know what? Bootstrapping is what this is all about, right? And we talked about this on a podcast a few weeks ago. There's a lot of very big campaigns that are shot practically, right? That video, so you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, we're working on Cities of Venus right now, and with that video, I was going to do a lot of it animated. I've got kind of a front end animation just showing kind of a rocket leaving Earth and traveling to Venus. But I'm pretty sure I'm gonna do the rest of it shooting. I have the game, so why don't I just shoot what I've got? The game looks awesome, right? And music tracks, things like that. Like you can do things very economically, where you don't have to bust the bank. And I think some people have been kind of led down this myth of you need to hire, a big video company to create your video for you, and you have to have all this, fancy 3D animation done. And it always makes things look nice, but there's a lot of examples where that isn't necessarily what drives success, right? And it's building your audience, and it's having a great game and the concept and things like that, something unique that seems interesting. These are the things that will help drive it. And you have to decide if you have the budget or not to put that extra icing on. If you don't, you have to find ways to bootstrap it. Right. And I think it's cool when I see that. So again, congrats on that. So we did a little diversion here. I want to get back to this. So how do you play this game?
Okay. So first I'll do my typical stuff. I'll give you the thematic pitch. And then I'll run you through kind of the basic turn structure. I'm not going to go into detail over every single mechanism. So in Scrap, you're playing what's known as an intelligence. In other game language, it'd be a faction. So you're a faction of bots. But what's happened is there was an event known as the Singularity, which spread this mysterious substance known as Celestium all throughout the galaxy. I know I said a lot of space words there, but basically what Celestium is, if you equate it to other themes, think of it like the Force or the magic that kind of permeates throughout the universe. As that Celestium washed over different beings in the galaxy, it had very different effects. So when it washed over, for example, some bestial aliens who might come up in a future game, they evolved in weird and wild ways. When it washed over all of the AI throughout the universe, all of the robots, they developed the semblance of intelligence. So starting to develop cognition and thought and all of those wonderful things. And they also developed a hunger to find out more about this event, the Singularity. So they've all traveled to this same planet, the planet Ceratus, in order to study it and find out what's happened. So that's actually your goal in the game. Your goal is to basically gather 50 data in order to discover the secrets behind what happened with the Singularity. Now that's the thematic pitch. The mechanical pitch and the way the game works is that effectively is an asymmetric area control game. Right, so a lot of the game is you're going to be deploying bots onto the planet, so getting more bots into play, moving those bots around to try and control areas, and then you're going to get benefits for controlling those areas. So a fairly common loop in a lot of games. But what makes Scrap particularly unique is how that action happens. So it's really broken into 3 phases. I'm actually going to start in the last phase because it helps to frame the first phase. What happens in the third phase is you're going to have this hand of cards called function cards. With each of the function cards, they're all unique in some way. So there are common actions. If you imagine that you have an attack card and I have an attack card, the core action is the same. We attack in exactly the same way, but there's some additional ability that is going to be unique to my faction as well. What you're going to do with these function cards is you're going to form a program. So you'll take 2 of the 7 or so you start with, and you'll place them face down in front of you. So one on the right, one on the left. Then on your turn, we're going to jump back to phase 1. So we were just in phase 3. You're going to jump to phase 1. You do the following things. You flip up the one that's on the right, and then you resolve it. So you've actually already pre-programmed your major action for the turn. Unlike a lot of games, you're not selecting it. You choose it well in advance, so 2 turns in advance. You don't choose exactly what you're going to do with it. So I might flip up a card that gives me lots of movement points. I don't have to program where all of my bots are going to go. I can decide on the turn where they're going to go. But I've programmed that this turn, it's going to be movement. Once you've done that, you'll move into the last phase, or the second one, which is the call phase. And in the call phase, you have a little more flexibility. This is almost like playing a mini game of Scythe with tech tracks. So you've got these 4 different tech tracks that you can go up, which represent kind of 4 major types of actions. You've got your move action, your build action, you get energy action, energy being a resource, and then also your punching action. And so each turn, you'll put down your focus marker, you'll develop that track a little further, and then you'll perform an action on that track. Now, as you advance along those tracks, your actions get stronger. You also unlock more function cards that relate to that track. So if you're unlocking, for example, movement related ones, then you're not always going to get a movement function.
Mm-hmm.
You might get a function that has a little bit of a mobility flavor, basically. So that's what happens as you advance along those tracks and perform those actions. All the intelligences start at different points on those tracks. So some intelligences start with high mobility and high energy production, but they're terrible at building bots and they're terrible at fighting, as an example.
Yeah.
So they've got to kind of use that mobility to their advantage. Or you could just focus on the punching tech track if you wanted to, and then just go up in that and transform your intelligence entirely. The kicker with that track, though, so again, with a little bit of a scythe reference, is you can't pick the same track 2 turns in a row. In fact, you can only move to an adjacent one. So every turn, you're actually only having a choice of 2. So even though there's some flexibility, you're still bound by your programming. And the last thing I really want to emphasize is how Celestium, that mystical thing you're studying, all ties into this. So throughout the game, different effects will give you Celestium. Sometimes you may not get that much Celestium throughout the game, depending on what you do. But Celestium lets you cheat, basically. So you remember how I talked about with programming, when you flip over a function, you've got your basic ability, which is the same for everyone, and you've got your power-up ability. So usually, in order to resolve that power-up ability, you need to discard a card from your hand that matches. So if I've got a blue card face up, I've got to discard a blue card from my hand to unlock that bonus ability. Celestium just says, spend me, and you can power up. It doesn't matter what color it is, I'll just power it up for you. So that's one way Celestium lets you cheat. The next way is, you remember I talked about the tracks, how there's 4, and you basically can only choose an adjacent one. Celestium says, you can pick whichever one you want. You can even do the same one again. And the last one is, when you're programming cards, Celestium lets you put down 2 cards in a stack, so that when they flip up, you actually have a choice of what you're going to play. So Celestium actually represents your robots developing more flexibility, and it's kind of intertwined throughout the game in that way.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it looks awesome. One question I had is, why GameFound? So for your first game, was there a decision of why you chose GameFound versus Kickstarter?
You'd certainly hope so. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm not new to the industry. I've been around for 19 years, much more than half my life. I'm aware that Kickstarter is the big one, right? But there are a few reasons I picked GameFound. So I'll focus more on the positive stuff. So I picked GameFound because I really like that they're trying to innovate a little more. So, and as an example, in my campaign, there were 2 new features that were trialed. One was the stretch payment feature. Basically, what that allows you to do is, I think, yeah, exactly. So like you just, pay your pledge over time, basically. So what happens there is that I still, on my campaign, see that you've pledged $100, $150, whatever it may be. But that only actually comes out of your bank account over 3 months. So the first month will be $50 and then $50 the month after. So it's kind of a midway between that $1 pledge for backers, which is obviously great for backers, but not so great for publishers. And, convincing people to back 150 straight up and it coming out of the bank. So I thought that was a great feature. And the other one was the stable pledge, where basically if shipping goes haywire later on, it gives backers the ability to have an out, where if the shipping shifts too much, they actually get 100% refund if they wish. They can pay the extra shipping if they want to, or they can just back out and GameFound will fully refund them. So that's one thing, is innovation and actually new features that I think are good for both publishers and good for backers as well. On a practical level as well, so as a self-publisher, so again, someone who's basically doing most of the stuff myself, I don't do the art, by the way. I'm not that good. You'd get stick figures and that'd be it.
Yep.
What I have to do is I, organize kind of the art direction. So I give ideas and I have to manage that. And then I have to do the game design, the play testing, a lot of the graphic design, the rule book, managing the the manufacturer, managing the crowdfunding campaign, managing the marketing. So there's a lot of plates to spin, basically. And so GameFound has its pledge manager automatically included as part of the service. So that just meant there was one less thing I had to organize. I didn't have to go out and find a new pledge manager, find out what their terms and conditions were, compare it to other pledge managers, work out what the percentage they're going to take is, work out what that means, not my bottom line, but like, just how much do I need to make to not bankrupt myself. And so it was just easier logistically. So I'm aware that Kickstarter probably would have got more organic traffic. And GameFound doesn't have that reach just yet, but for practicality and also just to kind of stand for innovation in the industry, I decided to use GameFound.
No, it's awesome. No, it's good to hear the perspective too, right? Because I think, obviously there's some deep thought and consideration that went in. And I think a lot of people have to go through the decision process. Okay, which one am I going to go with? And what are the pros and cons? And as long as the pros are there for you, then it's the right platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jolly Swagman Games. You're now a company. You're a designer. It's your full-time job right now.
Yeah, it is.
And so what's next? So you have this game. Like, do you have several titles you're working on? Like, is there a suite of games you're planning, and kind of what's coming up?
So in order to make sure that Scrap was kind of the best game possible, I really focused just on that. Like, I'm really good at coming up with a whole bunch of different ideas for all these different games and Scrap, and trying to, like a lot of designers, the problem is not coming up with ideas. The problem is cutting down the ideas so you find something workable, basically. So I do have a lot of other games in the pipeline. So I can kind of talk about 2 titles that I'm in the early stages of, I would say. So one of them is a game called Floodplain, which is actually, it's in the same vein as, if you're aware of The Cost, which is a game about asbestos mining. And it's also in the similar vein to Barrage. So it's kind of like, it's about Australia and how floodplain harvesting happens there. And basically it disrupts the river systems. So it's kind of like, what if disrupting and manipulating water in Barrage actually was bad for the environment and bad for towns, basically. And so you explore those effects. What I've tried to do, though, is go for the ability to win by being mean. So you can, be a jerk and reroute the water and all of that, and things will suffer and you can win the game. Or you can be really nice and not do that and still also win the game. I want both paths to be viable rather than it to be just a preach on, this is bad, don't do that.
Yeah.
The other game I have in my pipeline is actually another one in the Scrap universe. So it's set in what I call the Celestium saga. And that game is called Beyond. Beyond is inspired a little bit mechanically by Kenegi, a fairly recent game, which I played, and no hate against like the design or anything. The theme for me is so bland. Like it's very much doing what I like to say is Euro things. Yeah. You build track, but it's like you basically build track. You send your workers out to get literally cubes or whatever, and then you get dollars. It's very plain, but that worker mechanism, like moving your people around your departments, is so fun. So I wanted to make a game that used that mechanism, but in what I think is a more engaging theme. So I've got this idea of you managing a Star Trek ship, basically, and moving your people around there and sending on missions off planet in order to retrieve them, and so on and so forth. And it's got a little bit of a deduction element too, but I'll save that for later on.
Well, that sounds awesome. I mean, I can't wait to see where you end on this campaign. I mean, this one here already 23,000, and you still got 26 days left. Man, I wish you all the best. For anybody that wants to check out this campaign, it's called Scrap. We'll have a link in the Board Game Binge podcast private Facebook group. If you join our group or if you're part of it, you'll see it there. You can also just go to gamefound.com and type in Scrap, and you'll find it. Or quite frankly, how I found it was actually on the landing page of gamefound.com. As soon as you go to GameFound, is right there in the list of games. So, Kenny, I want to wish you all the best. And let's hopefully this is going to be an amazing year for you. I know it's going to be a good start, and I can't wait to see how this finishes.
Fingers crossed. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, my friend. You take care. Cheers.
Have a good one. Bye.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.